Topic here is Black religious nationalism and the Black Power movement origins. At the end of this session, you want to be able to define these terms here, complete the source framework sheet, and you want to analyze the speech using this chart. We're going to do a quick introduction to Malcolm X. Gains support in the early 1960s, starts to gain a lot of followers, and his ideas definitely impact people in the endpoint of the 1960s as we move from happy protests, sit-ins, and boycotts as the decade gets progressively more violent through assassinations of Medgar Evers, Malcolm X as well, Birmingham, and numerous riots. People start to get angry and resort to some of the extremes, and Malcolm X's ideas represents one of those particular extreme views. Now, looking at the civil rights, or looking at the concept of Black nationalism. So to point out, within society, both King and Malcolm X are on the left because they represent an alternative to the status quo. But within the Black civil rights movement, Malcolm X is on the right because he is advocating for Black nationalism, a conservative idea, the preservation of the people he is advocating for. Malcolm X's eulogy, one of the things they mentioned that Malcolm was our manhood because he says things in a way that's blunt, direct, straight to the point, and probably a little threatening to white America for the late 50s going into the early 60s with regard to the way he phrased certain things. And the speech that we're going to look at is a perfect example of Malcolm X being the manhood for African Americans at this particular point of the civil rights movement. Now, this excerpt is from the Black Revolution. This is not one of the required sources, but it is going to help us to understand the point of view that Malcolm X has. Keep in mind, he is arguing that integration is only a temporary solution. He uses the example of Chinatown because in Chinatown, the community is controlling the banks, the politics, they own everything. Whereas for Malcolm's view, his argument is that going to be that white America controls all of those institutions, which is going to constantly keep Black Americans at the bottom of the system of stratification. To expand on his idea, let's look at this scenario here. Let's just say in a Black nation that Malcolm X was advocating for in his Black Revolution piece, if you were Black crossing the street and a Black police officer confronted you and gives you a ticket for jaywalking, in the back of your mind, you would have no indication that this was a result of your race. You go to a job interview, if the individual making a decision about whether or not you get this job is Black, in your mind, if you do not get the job, you are not going to have the thought that this is happening as a result of your race. If you are denied the job and the individual says no, you pretty much can go about your day, and you decide, since you don't have a job, that you are going to put your entrepreneurial skills to work and you are going to apply for a bank loan. And the person making this decision about the loan, if the individual is Black, in the back of your mind, you are not going to have this thought process that what is happening to you as a result of your race. And this is ultimately what Malcolm X is advocating for. He's trying to argue that Blacks need to control every aspect of their community, but this seems to be very difficult if they use the integration approach because white America controls too much of the society and the institutions, which will always put Blacks at a disadvantage. That's the argument he is ultimately making. To expand on that point, in line 63 of the Black Revolution, he brings up these points: a better job in the white man's factory, a better job in the white man's business, the white man's industry or economy. At best, temporary solution is what integration is going to lead to in his view, which is why he's arguing for separation. To get a better understanding of Malcolm X's thought process, we will look at these clips here so we can hear Malcolm X in his own words. And again, after we listen to those speeches from Malcolm X, his answers to questions, as well as some of the excerpts from the Black Revolution, hopefully we have this understanding in his eulogy of why they argued that Malcolm was our manhood, our living Black manhood. Some terms in the AP framework: the Nation of Islam, the NOI, Elijah Muhammad, the leader of this organization, Malcolm X is going to be the spokesperson who Elijah Muhammad is going to appoint, and they are going to promote Black Power. It's not the first time we've seen this particular thought process. In Unit 2, we looked at Martin Robinson Delaney, and in that section, there was an argument to be made about this Black Power, Black nationalism approach, that he may or may not have been the founding thinker for that particular idea. We also want to take note that this Nation of Islam is using Islam as the solution to the race problem in America, whereas Christianity seemed to be the religion that has been at the forefront of leading out of slavery as well as segregation. I put 2 verses from the Quran here. From Malcolm X's point of view, he's looking at it through the lens of white America is in a position to impact the lives of Black Americans. As he says here, fight in the cause of God those who fight you. So if you believe that white America is fighting against you, then this would mean that you could potentially apply this surah in this situation. And that ultimately is going to be Malcolm's view, where if you are attacked, you are within your human right to respond to such violence and threats. As we mentioned before, Malcolm X was for separation. He did not believe that black and white would be able to coexist as a result of some of these scenarios we looked at before, whereas King's SCLC is advocating for integration. Malcolm in the Nation of Islam is advocating for separation. And this idea is definitely going to resonate with a lot of people within the civil rights movement as people get angry as a result of the violence of the mid-60s going into the endpoint of the 1960s. As we could see here, the Black Power salute at the Olympics, definitely an influential figure within the Black civil rights movement. As we move on to source 1, we want to create this chart, and these are the things we want to look at. Which enemies does Malcolm identify? What criticism of the civil rights movement does he believe in? And what is the ballot or the bullet? So we're going to skip around. We're not going to analyze every portion of this particular document, but for the most part, in this section, he brings up the different religious groups that have been advocating for change. And then he brings up the point that he is a Muslim. So here we're starting to see some of the tension that possibly will exist between the Christians, as he mentions up here, the Baptist Church, and now we're throwing in another religion into the equation that potentially has a different solution to the racial problem in America. In this portion of the document, he brings up President Kennedy because Kennedy represents the federal government. We've already addressed the Federalist and Anti-Federalist debate. And the question here, are we going to use the ballot or the bullet to secure some sort of change? He argues that time is running out. We're not going to be able to rely on the federal government. And this seems to be one of the themes that he brings up throughout this particular piece. In this section, Malcolm brings up the issue of what makes a citizen within the United States. And his argument is that people coming off the boat automatically are citizens in comparison to the individuals who are already here, the people who are victims of what is going on and has been going on in America. So if we want to go back and remember the Dred Scott decision, which argued that the African slave was not even a citizen, even if they were free, this is where Malcolm's going with this particular section of the document. As we move on, it was the black man's vote that put the present administration in Washington, D.C. So this is looking at the federal government and arguing that the black vote is possibly what put Kennedy and then Johnson as the vice president after the assassination. Malcolm is arguing that the black vote definitely contributed to that particular election. But as he brings up here, Texas is a lynch state. Here he is very critical of Lyndon Johnson as a Southern Democrat. And here he brings up the administration and then the support within the House of Representatives. Notice how he brings up Democrats as well as Republicans. As we move on, he's arguing that it's time to wake up. This section, he brings up some of the low-skilled jobs that Africans were able to obtain. That's camouflage, that's trickery, that's treachery, window dressing. I'm not trying to knock out the Democrat for the Republicans. We'll get to them in a minute. So he definitely here is starting to be critical of the Democrats, but he's arguing that he's also going to attack the Republicans. We also want to keep in mind that the Democratic Party, this is the reason why we spent time looking at federalism, which would eventually evolve to states' rights. States' rights would be a big portion of those segregation laws and that tension between the local, state, and federal government that we have addressed already. Malcolm continues with his attack on people from D.C. who are in a position of power to change the situation. These senators and congressmen violate the constitutional amendment that guarantee the people of that state or county the right to vote. If the black man in the southern state had his full voting right, the key Dixiecrats in D.C., which means the key Democrats in Washington, D.C. So what he's saying here is that the Democratic Party is the Democratic Party, but there are people within the Democratic Party who are the Dixiecrats. So it's almost like you have two political parties within, and the Dixiecrats, which are a part of the Democratic Party before they eventually break off to create their own political party. These individuals are the ones that are putting up resistance. These are the states' rights advocates, the anti-federalists that we've been talking about in this course. In this section, he continues with his attack, but then he makes a comparison to the North. What I'm trying to press upon you, in essence, is this: you and I in America are faced with a segregationist conspiracy. That conspiracy, in his view, is led by the Dixiecrats, this federal government that constantly, in his view, has not done anything to really change the circumstances of the African American in the United States. So where do we go from here? We need some friends. We need some new allies. This entire civil rights struggle needs a new interpretation. This is where he's going to start advocating for black nationalism and ultimately arguing that the civil rights movement prior to this particular speech, in his view, is one that really is not going to be the solution. We've already addressed the fact that Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam is for separation, not for integration. In this section, Malcolm brings up poverty and argues that you're my mother, father who didn't work an 8-hour shift, but worked from can't see in the morning until can't see at night, worked for nothing, making the white man rich. Keep in mind, his argument is that the white man controls too many of the institutions, the economy. That was something that we looked at in the Black Revolution speech. Malcolm continues with his attack on the Democratic Party, the civil rights movement. He even brings up "we shall overcome" here. In this section, if a Negro in 1964 has to sit around and wait for some cracker senator to filibuster, what that means there is, in the Senate, when you filibuster, this is a way to kill legislation. So here we have a law, and when a senator stands up to comment on that law, if he or she decides to filibuster, that basically means that they are going to continue talking and not stop. And this is designed as a way to run out the clock to avoid the legislation from ever being passed. That's why he's bringing up that particular piece, because if the year is 1964, we're looking at the year where the Civil Rights Act of 64 and then the Voting Rights Act is going to be passed. We want to go back to the chart. These are the items you are responsible for. What enemies does he identify? He seemed to identify a whole bunch. He definitely criticized a lot of the civil rights movement religiously. He also criticized the movement as far as its alliance with politicians that didn't really seem to change the situation for blacks in America. And you also want to treat this as a definition. What is the ballot or the bullet? Some more required images from the AP framework. This photograph of King and Malcolm. Here we have another required image from the AP framework. Muhammad Speaks newspaper, salesman. That seems to be what they all have. They're going to spread the voice of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Another required image from the AP framework. Muslims at a convention and Elijah Muhammad speaking. To finish up here, we're going to look at some of these clips from the Spike Lee movie Malcolm X. We're going to look at the JFK assassination scene. This is a significant scene because Malcolm X is eventually going to get suspended by Elijah Muhammad. He will then travel to Mecca, and when he travels to Mecca, he comes to this realization that under Islam, black and white can coexist peacefully, and that perhaps maybe in the United States, Islam or some other solution is out there that exists. And there's something about the United States that's unique in his view, which is going to prompt him to start his own organization. But eventually he will be assassinated. There's also COINTELPRO. COINTELPRO was attached to the FBI, and their job during the 60s was to infiltrate far left and far right groups. And there's speculation maybe that the Nation of Islam, who assassinated Malcolm X, would potentially pull off that assassination with the assistance of COINTELPRO. However, that has been disputed. And this clip here, this is Malcolm X giving his famous "chickens are coming home to roost" after the JFK assassination, which ultimately led to his suspension. They want to verify your definitions, check your source worksheet, and verify the terms here.